Nice. Good afternoon, everybody. Today we're going to talk to you about our no-code integration. My name is Mehran Galal. I'm VP of Software Development at Appian. I've been with Appian for a little over 14 years. And I've really had an illustrious career inside of professional services, COE, as well as software engineering for the past 3 years.
And my name is Colton Walker. I'm the product owner for HTTP Integrations, but I started out as a consultant at Appian, where I worked for a year and a half before moving over to the engineering department last December.
That's great. Thanks, Colton. So a couple of years ago, actually, we launched our brand new Shiny Integration Designer, and we actually asked the audience to do a zombie posture, because integration can be really scary. I mean, does anybody doubt it? Thanks. I mean, most projects actually get tripped up because integration can be fairly complex, and we intended to make integration as simple as it can be to make sure that you bring those data and integrations from your system into your enterprise applications. Now, I really like the theme so much that I started using it year over year. So last year, we actually brought additional features in the Integration Designer between OAuth, Open APIs, a MuleSoft partnership and integration, as well as launching a huge set of machine learning connected systems in the environment as well. We brought it together in actually a nice use case with a zombie apocalypse, and actually took the risk of having people send us text of how to escape the zombie apocalypse using Twilio. Just bringing together the idea that integration never really happens separately. You have to bring those features together to really realize the ease of integration in the enterprise. Now, this year you may think, well, what else are these guys going to talk about? You think it's sunny and beautiful outside, and it is. You should go to the pool and try it out. But if you look a little closer, there are a couple of little pesky zombies that we're going to try to take down as well. So hopefully we get to talk to you about some of the additional features that we built out in the last year, and you can get to enjoy the low-code integration designer. Before I actually talk about these zombies, actually Colton is going to talk about these zombies. I wanted to level set for those who are not familiar with the integration designer. So integration in general is, well, specifically outbound integrations, is to send and make calls from web or HTTP-based endpoints to bring back that information into your system so that you can integrate those data that you bring back in your interfaces, in your processes, and in your records. That's the basic premise behind integration in general. Now, of course, with integrations, you have to really understand the documentation and the features and parameters and configuration for those end systems, and often you have to look up documentation in order to configure your integration as appropriately as possible to put it in your application. And the journey for us in the past couple of years has been to really make it as no-code as possible, because integration can be really complex. So a couple of things that we worked on over the past few years is the idea of connected systems to share properties with these integrations. Often the case is that you will build integrations to one system, but you may build several integrations that perform various operations. Some of those properties are generally very common amongst the different integrations that you will build. Things like the logo's identification description, the authentication method that we'll use for that named system or that web service in this case. Once you configure these common properties, then you can use it in several integrations beyond that, where you really may not need to look as much documentation about that target system as you did before. So once you configure the baseline connected system for the name for those systems, and configure the authentication properties, you really can start configuring some additional methods for a specific integration, one of many, for example, based on that system. You can add additional URL parameters, endpoint, decide on the method you want to use for the specific integration, decide whether you're writing data or reading data, what are the query parameters that you picked up from the documentation to put in the integration designer, and some additional properties that are really designed to make it experimentally possible for you to achieve a successful connection to the endpoint. And that's really the major theme around integration designer, is that you're often experimenting with trying the documentation and parameters to make sure that you can make a live successful connection. And once you finish all of that configuration, we wanted to make sure that you have a seamless experience without having to pop out of the integration designer whatsoever. So once you configure a lot of those, you can always test the connection at any given point in time. You know if the service brought back a response, what that response shape would look like, how long did it take, and more importantly, if you run into any trouble through that experimentation life cycle as you build the integration, you have the ability to look at the request you're sending the target system so that you know exactly what parameters, what query parameters, what configuration settings you may have sent to the target system to understand what the core issue is. And also you get the response back. What did the web service actually respond back with? Did it respond with a success? And what was that success message? Did it respond with an error? What was that error message? And gives you some additional features in the Integration Designer, allows you even to override that error message to handle it uniquely for the integrations in the business case that you have. So we've been at it for a couple of years and beyond, of course, and a lot of our customers have been giving us a lot of positive feedback. I'm quoting a couple of our team members that use the Integration Designer to bring tremendous amount of simplicity in integration challenge that they have. So customers, for example, you've heard about the Appian Guarantee. Integration Designer makes that possible even in an 8-week window when you're building a business application with Appian. Our cloud team that runs a fairly complex operation realizes that Integration Designer can provide a simple approach to make integrations of complex workflows as simple as possible without having to do a lot of custom work underneath it to manage a well-run environment like Appian Cloud. And one important thing that we've noticed, we obviously watch how our features are being used with our customers. I don't have the real data for you, nor can I really show it, but this particular cartoonish diagram that I'm showing you right now actually shows that a lot of the custom build components or plugins that people may have used or very clever designs that they brought in from process flows and interfaces and expressions and rules are actually going down or trending down, while the Integration Designer and all the facilities we're providing are actually trending up, and most people really started just using the Integration Designer as default mechanism to make Appian integrations possible.
Thanks, Madhat. So, he showed us how a lot of the innovations that we've done over the last 2 years have made it easier than ever to integrate Appian with some of these other systems. However, our work's not done yet. And as he alluded to before, I'm going to go over some of those little zombies today. I'm going to talk about trusted server certificates and how Appian integration errors make troubleshooting easy. I'm going to talk about integration authentication and how every new authentication type that we add translates to new web services that you can hit. I'm going to talk about document exchange, so how do we send and receive documents between Appian and other systems. I'm going to talk a little bit about configurable integration timeout and how that translates to a better experience for your end users. And then I'm going to close everything out by talking about API keys for Appian web APIs. So let's dive right in. What do I mean when I say trusted server certificates? Well, a lot of you have probably seen a green icon like this next to the URL in your address bar. And what that means is that you have an HTTPS connection. And the S stands for secure, which I think it goes without saying that Appian integrations need to be secure. So to accomplish this, we use something called an SSL certificate. SSL certificates provide both encryption and authentication. And traditionally, these are often purchased from certificate authorities such as VeriSign. Now, when you purchase your certificate through one of these trusted certificate authorities, Appian will just trust it by default. However, that's not the only option. Some of our customers want to use self-signed or internal certificates. So you can use a tool like OpenSSL to generate your own certificates. When you do that, we don't know to trust that by default, so you will have to manually add that certificate to your trust store. Now, when you're browsing the internet, sometimes you might see an error like this. This is what it looks like when you encounter an untrusted certificate. And it's never fun to run into an error like this on the internet, but it's really important because you want to know that your connections are secure. And that's doubly important in Appian. So from this page, you can download that certificate, which you need to add to your trusted certificate store. But if you've ever had to do something like this before, you're probably familiar with this key tool here. You're going to have to download some external software and use it with the command line in order to modify that trusted certificate store. Well, in Appian, we didn't want you to have to download any other tools or anything like that. We wanted to make it as easy as possible for you to understand what's happening and how to resolve that issue. So I'm going to show you how that looks today. When we try to hit an endpoint that relies on an untrusted server certificate, we get a very clear message telling us that Appian couldn't verify the identity of that endpoint, but that we need to upload a certificate to the trusted certificate store. And we will even link you directly to the page in the admin console where you can make this change. So that certificate that you can download from that endpoint I showed you, you're going to simply upload it here to this grid and click the upload button. And as simple as that, it's been added to your trusted certificate store. So now, when we return to our integration and test it again, it's simply going to work. You didn't have to go comb through some complicated documentation or download external tools, and you certainly didn't have to go through the command line. It just works. So that's one zombie down, but we've got a few more, as we showed. Next, I'm going to talk to you about integration authentication. So as you know, our customers like to hit a variety of popular web services across the internet. And these web services rely on different authentication methods. So every time we add support for one of these authentication types, it's kind of like we're adding a key to Appian. And in the case of one of these endpoints, it's not so much that I'm determining what kind of authentication do I want to use for this endpoint. It's more like this endpoint requires basic authentication. Do I support it? So it's obviously important that we continue to add these new authentication methods to give you access to as many web services as possible. But behind the scenes, it can be a relatively complicated process. And to really illustrate that, I'm going to talk about one of the leading standards in the industry, OAuth 2.0. Now, many of us use OAuth every single day, whether we're aware of it or not. If you've ever signed up for or signed into a service using your Facebook credentials, you were using OAuth 2.0. And this provides a very nice user experience. However, behind the scenes, there's a lot of stuff that has to go right. And I'm going to show you some diagrams here, but don't worry too hard about explaining it or understanding it. As you can see, there are a number of different flows that need to take place between a number of different systems. And all of these exchanges is a new point of failure. Now, there are even several diagrams dedicated to determining which OAuth flow you even need. So the barrier here to first understanding OAuth can be harder than we would want it to be. But like anything in Appian, we wanted to take a complicated problem and abstract away that complexity so that we can make using OAuth super easy for you. So if you were at last year's presentation, you might remember that MedHat showed off our new support for the authorization code grant. And this is the flavor of OAuth that you may be familiar with that allows you to see these dialogues that allow me as a user to grant Appian permission to my resources. So for example, if you're a user in DocuSign, you can grant Appian access to push documents to your DocuSign account where you can then sign them. However, there are a number of OAuth use cases that can be satisfied without any need for end-user intervention. One such flow, which we implemented in the past year, is called the Client Credentials Grant. With the Client Credentials Grant, you can simply plug in 4 fields and you're ready to authorize. And this will grant you access to systems like, to the Microsoft Graph API, which will grant you access to systems like Azure AD, Outlook, Office 365, and a lot more of Microsoft's APIs. And again, these don't require any user intervention, so it's a lot better, more simple, streamlined process. Now, in a similar vein, we added support for an authentication type called Google Service Account. And this is used by all of Google's APIs, Drive, Dialogflow, and Google Calendar. One of the cool things about this authentication type is that you can actually just download a file from Google and upload it into Appian. And when you do that, it's going to parse out a lot of these fields for you. So all you need to do is plug in your scope and you're ready to authorize. Every time we add one of these authentication methods, that's another zombie down. That's another set of web services that we're enabling you to connect to. The next thing I want to talk to you about is a popular topic, document exchange. And when I say document exchange, I really mean 2 things. Taking documents in Appian and pushing them to external systems, or reaching out to external systems and pulling documents back into Appian. There have been options for doing things like this in the past. We have several smart services and custom plugins that were tailored towards enabling our users to exchange documents. However, we wanted to bring it into the integration designer. And the reason we wanted to do this is because those legacy smart services and plugins don't give you access to these new authentication types that we're adding. They're not going to give you that no-code experience that we love so much. And that's one of the things that's really important to understand about the integration designer. These features don't exist in a vacuum. They don't work in isolation. They work together. So it's the combination of something like document exchange with another feature like authentication that will often enable these integrations. And as I said before, with any of these endpoints, you really never know which one of these things it's going to be. Do I need a trusted server certificate? Do I need an authentication type? The list goes on. There are a lot of things that you have to take into consideration when doing document exchange, a lot of complicated questions. How is it authenticated? What's the data format? Is it binary or base 64? With Appian, We're going to abstract away a lot of that complexity and sort of guide you through a wizard-like experience that's going to enable you to succeed the first time. To illustrate this, I want to show you a demo of us hooking up to the Google Drive API. What we're going to do is pull back a file by its file ID. Now, ahead of time, before recording this video, I uploaded an image of our zombie, and I took note of its file ID in Google Drive. And now I'm going to show you how with Appian, it's so simple that it's almost boring. Almost. So the first thing we want to do is create a connected system that's going to represent that Google Drive API. As Medhat said, we're going to give it a useful name and description, some things that are going to be shared across all the integrations that leverage this connected system. Excuse me. So our new Google Service Account authentication type, like I said, is used by many Google APIs, so it's not surprising that we're using that one here. And we can simply upload that file that we downloaded from Google, plug in the scope, and again, we're ready to authorize. Now we can create our integration that's going to allow us to pull back that file by its file ID. So the first thing we're going to want to do is create an input for the file ID so that we can use this integration to pull back any file that we have access to. And we're going to paste in that value that we copied down ahead of time that corresponds to the file ID of the zombie image. Then, to put that into the relative path, all we're going to do is append that input onto the end of a string. Very simple. From the documentation, we know that we're going to need to add a query parameter, but we can do so using this simple grid interface, so we don't have to think about any of the complexity behind that. And then as the last step, we're going to update our response body parsing. You can see there's a new option that allows you to convert the response body to an Appian document, given that it's binary. So you simply provide a document name, specify where you want to store it, and you're ready to go. And when we execute that integration, sure enough, you're going to see an Appian document in the body, rather than some mess of ones and zeros. So to really drive this point home, we're going to plug this into an interface that I set up ahead of time, with a button that doesn't do anything. To call the integration, all we need to do is type in the name of our integration, pass in a file ID, and choose what variable we want to save it into. Now, we're going to want to copy that file ID again and plug it into the text field, and we're ready to pull back that file. Very easy. We got an image back from Google Drive, and we had a nice guided experience to get there. Document exchange is a very common use case for a lot of our customers. And in the past year, we've enabled the ability to send and receive documents as both binary and base64. And again, that will provide you access to all of the integration features. So from here, I'm going to move into talking about the new configurable integration timeout. When Appian links up to a web service, it reaches out and sends a request. And then it needs to wait for a response. And if that external system is unreliable or unresponsive, Appian's going to wait, and wait, and wait, and wait, and wait. Because the thing is, when these integrations don't return, it can result in long load times for our users and even missing tasks. It's a very frustrating experience. Now, if you wanted to resolve this issue in another system, you'd probably import some threading libraries and implement some custom logic to try to cut that integration off. But in Appian, we wanted to make it simple. So we simply added a new field to the integration designer that allows you to specify the amount of time in seconds that you want Appian to wait for a response before it cuts it off. And I want to bring it back to the end users, because that's who this is really all about. They're not going to see those long loading times. They're not going to have those missing tasks. It's just going to work. Now I want to switch gears a little bit. Up until this point, we've been talking about outbound integrations. For these, you initiate the integration in Appian, which then reaches out to another system. That system can return data to Appian. However, with Appian Web APIs, it's actually initiated in the external system. So that system can reach out to Appian, at which point we can return data to the system. And this can be used to fill a number of different potential use cases. You can modify processes, data stores, records, documents, and more. And one of the nice things about web APIs is that we offer you a variety of templates that you can use as a jumping off point so that we don't just throw you into the deep end. We give you a nice guided experience, again, enabling you to just succeed. Up until this point, Appian web APIs have been authenticated using basic authentication. But just like we want to keep adding options to our outbound integrations, we wanted to add a new option to our inbound authentication. And that's where we identified the last zombie I want to talk about today, API keys for Appian web APIs. Now, system administrators can create API keys in the admin console that can be used to authenticate Appian web APIs. These work with our new service accounts, users that can't log into Appian, but that can be used to scope API keys so that you configure which objects that API key will grant you access to. One of the nice things about these service accounts is that they won't be deactivated due to inactivity. So when your annual process rolls around, you can rest assured that it's just going to work. And these API keys are more secure, more performant, and simply easier to use than ever before. And that's one more zombie down. So we talked about a lot of things today. We talked about trusted server certificates and how Appian integration errors make it easy to troubleshoot problems in Appian. We talked about integration authentication and how every new authentication type that we add provides our customers with access to more and more web services. We talked about document exchange and how the integration can now be used to send and receive documents both as binary and base64. We talked about the configurable integration timeout and how that ultimately results in a better end user experience. And finally, we talked about API keys for Appian web APIs. And honestly, things are looking pretty nice at the Bayfront. It's a beautiful day today, but we're always on the lookout for more of those zombies. So let us know if you see any. Now, if you want to take a closer look at this presentation or you have any questions, please feel free to download the presentation from the Appian World mobile app to take a closer look. Initially, you can see these integrations in action at our low-code app development booth and at our ICC booth. And lastly, you can take the e-learning design course available on academy.appian.com this summer. Thank you for attending our presentation.